get to some breaking news, which is the so-called alleged potential ceasefire. And as always, there's a lot of conflicting information. Can you tell us what is happening right now with this ceasefire, in quotes?
With the possible ceasefire,
Right.
in quotes. Well, first of all, can I say what this is not? This is not an end to the genocide. The genocide will continue regardless of what happens in these talks. I would say go further and say these are not ceasefire talks. They are talks between the two principal perpetrators, the United States and Israel, on plans for the final stage of the genocide. That I'm saying the talks that are happening in Washington today with indicted war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu and convicted felon Donald Trump. And to remember as well that the U.S. putting itself out as a mediator is quite an absurd notion. The U.S. is not a mediator; it is a co-perpetrator. And when we set our expectations on what can come out of these initiatives, we have to keep that in mind as well. We also have to remember that Israel is not seeking a sustained ceasefire, and Netanyahu and others in his government have been very clear about that. He may or may not be willing to have a short pause in bombing and shooting in order to have an exchange of captives and so on. But he will not end this atrocity until it reaches its genocidal conclusion with the murder or the purging of all of the indigenous people of Palestine from Gaza. So our expectations are that at best, we might see something like a 60-day ceasefire and perhaps an exchange of some of the captives on both sides. But even that is questionable at this moment. I mean, things are moving quickly. I haven't seen a lot encouraging coming out of messaging from Doha or from Hamas representatives, as has been reported, despite a lot of the hoopla that's being issued out of Washington. But even that very modest 60-day ceasing of the firing of bullets and bombs is questionable because a lot of the key issues have been publicly rejected by the Israeli regime: troop withdrawals, full access for aid, U.S. guarantees. And what are U.S. guarantees worth? We're just coming out of a double act of aggression against Iran while Iran was negotiating with the Americans. So highly, highly questionable there. From the Hamas side, they are really trying to get a final end to the assault on Gaza, including after the 60-day period. They want to get rid of the mechanisms of genocide, including the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, so-called. They want full access for UN and international aid agencies to bring in relief, and they want the Israelis to withdraw. And on none of those points has the Israeli regime conceded. And I have to say, Katie, even if there was a ceasefire, and even if that ceasefire was made permanent, which there's no promise of that at all, that would still not end the genocide. We all want ceasefires because ceasefires, the firing of weapons result in the massacres daily of about 100 Palestinians a day. This would be news anywhere else in the world or in any other time in history. A population with having a massacre of 100 people, that would be top news. Here it's barely noticed in Western corporate media. So it would be a very good thing for the firing to stop. But Israel's strategy for genocide in Gaza is not based entirely upon gunpowder. It's based also on imposed disease, on people suffering from their wounds without treatment by destroying the health system, on imposed starvation, imposed thirst, and in the language of the Genocide Convention, creating conditions calculated to bring about the destruction of the group. So even if the bombing stops, these things would continue. The dying would continue. The suffering would continue. And even more than that, both Trump and Netanyahu today in their press conference in Washington, they both spoke openly about purging Palestinians out of Gaza. So that it clearly has not changed from the co-perpetrators. And then just one more piece on this. At exactly the moment that these discussions are going on, the Israeli regime has announced its plans to build a massive concentration camp. Yes, a concentration camp on the ruins of Rafah. This was announced by the Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, in which Palestinians, survivors of the genocide would be herded into this concentration camp in the south of Gaza. They would be imprisoned there by Israeli troops. That would define the next phase of the genocide. People, pushed to the sea and to the south and then into these camps. They're even talking about building this concentration camp during the 60-day pause. if that 60-day pause comes along. And then using the horrific suffering of this massive concentration camp in the south to compel people to leave and then to purge them from the Gaza Strip. Needless to say, all of these have nothing to do with ceasefire or ending the genocide. They are themselves grave breaches of international humanitarian law and crimes by all of those who are involved. So, what can you hope for in talks that are deemed to be a ceasefire? You can at best hope for a small pause that will not bring an end to the genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, it's disgusting. And as you pointed out, Craig, in the past, even when there have been ceasefires, they haven't been ceasefires, right? There have been continued fire and like a not even optics level, but I guess, slogan level ceasefire without any actual cessation. But, you just spoke of the disgusting open plans to concentrate Palestinians, as in concentrate them into camps, aka create concentration camps. And of course, Gaza has long been compared to a concentration camp or called concentration camp, but this is an even more blatant iteration of it. Let's hear and watch a short clip from the BBC, which of course is itself complicit in genocide, but that's a different issue. Let's play this video.
That we've heard now is from the Defense Minister Israel Katz, this plan to essentially move 600,000 people initially and then the full population of 2 million people to what he's described as a camp on the ruins of Rafah in the south of Gaza. He's talked about screening people to get in, to check that they aren't Hamas operatives, and to encourage then emigration. Otherwise, people wouldn't be allowed out into other areas of Gaza. Now, this has been strongly condemned by international lawyers who say that this is essentially pushing people into a confined space like this. Wider plans that the Israeli government has touted as well have been condemned as well by international lawyers as amounting to expulsion, not least, for example, the plans which Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu discussed, which include this idea of trying to get other countries to take in Palestinians from the Gaza Strip.
So that's, I'm torn because in some ways it's such a relief to even hear them report on this, given how much the media whitewashes or just ignores Israel's crimes. But then, I also think, imagine how they would be talking about this, like the level of emotion and condemnation that we would hear if they were describing something that Russia was doing versus Israel.
Well, you can hear in the language of the BBC, how they try to create a cushion for Israel. They use the language of emigration when they're really talking about forced expulsion, forced displacement, ethnic cleansing, ethnic purges. Right? Anywhere else, it would be called by its real name. And they use the language of, quote, a confined space to talk about a concentration camp. So the BBC has been, like many media corporations, has been wholly complicit in the genocide. And despite all of the pressure and shame that's been heaped on them in recent months, they are unable to break free from that very, very poor performance.
Right. I mean, it's just incredible. Like, it almost feels like they're just trolling the world, Israel. They weaponize the Holocaust constantly. This is all to prevent the Holocaust. Never again. Never again is now. Now we all know that that's total BS and garbage. Not the idea of never again. That idea is a noble one. And if it were applied to people in the way it should be, it would be great. Unfortunately, it is totally desecrated because it's being used to justify another genocide. And I don't know what could be more disgusting than to use the lesson of a genocide to argue for another genocide. But again, it's like they're not even trying to cover it up. They're just saying that they're going to be doing this.
I mean, the idea that you can, while you are perpetrating a genocide, declare never again is now is, I mean, that's beyond 1984.
Right.
That is really just amazing and shows you where we've come. What that is, Katie, as we've discussed before, that's the sound of impunity.
Yeah.
You are not bound by international law. You're not bound by morality, and you're not even bound by the rules of logic.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
whatever you want, that goes, because who's going to say otherwise?